It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. Welcome, everybody, for another podcast. We got our regulars here, Peter Lawrence, Chad Judner, and Brian Gannis, who's
also
been on a few times now, semi-regular, and Natalie has joined us before. Natalie Wasaki, welcome.
Hello again.
And today we're going to talk about having effective meetings or maybe having horrible meetings. We'll see where it goes. I made sure to put out an agenda and follow the rules for this one today, but we'll see how we do. I don't know if anybody in our line of work can get away with not having meetings at some point. So I know we've spoken in the past, Natalie, and you had some ideas, and because you have a lot of meetings and there are a lot of collaborative meetings where work needs to get done. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about your kind of viewpoint, philosophy about meetings, your passion?
Absolutely. So I mean, as you said, Kyle, it's a lot of the meetings that I have are collaborative ones with multiple voices in the room. Often I'm facilitating meetings. My general role is a UX designer. So there's a lot of meetings where we're having abstract conversations and trying to solve problems and brainstorm together. So those are meetings where they've just got to happen because we're trying to get people in a room and solve problems. But there's a lot of meetings that might not be quite like that. And you're more just giving an update, or you're just trying to get some feedback from folks or something, a little simpler. And sometimes those meetings, even though they might not sound that hard, still just don't go that well themselves. We've all been there, right? You have that meeting and you walk away and you feel like, man, opportunity missed. That went really poorly. I'm not really sure what we just agreed on, or we just had, a half an hour conversation for 60 minutes. Like what just happened?
Yeah. I've had, meetings where a decision had to be made. That was the goal, is we're going to get together, hash it out, and decide how to move forward. And all of that stuff happened except for the entire reason for having the meeting. And so it was, we'll have to circle back and do this again. And then the phrase, how many times are we going to have this meeting, will come up, and then you feel kind of bad.
Right. Yeah,
Once more.
I've had that too.
Yes.
And I love talking about this just because I kind of love meetings. I love people. I don't know if you can't tell, and being a designer, I love that opportunity to get everyone in the room and accomplish something that we weren't going to be able to accomplish by ourselves, just doing our thing. So to me, it's just when I see these meetings that are like that missed opportunity meeting, it's just such a bummer. And I would love it if everybody could kind of elevate and enjoy meetings more, make the most of them.
I appreciate your optimism and your enthusiasm for meetings.
But
I will ask, let me ask you a question. Is there, especially for like what we're doing right now, like online meetings, Teams meetings, is there a number of people in a meeting that makes it completely, like a complete waste of time? Is it possible to have too many people? What is your number for like the perfect amount of people to have to get together to try to come to a decision? And when does that get to become too many? And it's such a vague question. I've got a number in mind, but I'd be curious to hear what you have to say.
3 different numbers?
3 different numbers, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because that's where I was going to start. Is first of all, I would say it depends on the goal and type of the meeting, right? Like sort of a quarterly operational update that's going out to the whole org. I don't know. I guess you kind of, ideally, you're all going to be there and you just have a ton of people. It's just an update. But in a meeting, like we've kind of been talking about, where there's a decision-making process as like the main objective, then I would say thinking about the number of decision makers that you have is kind of the first place to start. You don't really need more people than that, especially if it's already going to be a handful, just to have those decision makers. So, so like somewhere in that 5-ish range, I've found is pretty good. Where some people might agree, some people might not agree, but you can still like facilitate everybody sharing their opinions.
Yeah, I agree with that, right? Like 5, 6, like that's where like people can actually have a conversation together and not talk over each other constantly. I differentiate between decision-making authority and decision-making context, right? Like I might have the authority to make a call, but I might not have the context. And I struggle with who to include at different times, right? Like, does the authority want all the context, or does the authority just want to trust the guy with the context to provide it? So, and I struggle with this a lot because I am in, lately it's been over 6 hours of meetings a day. And we are not all facilitated by somebody as good at this as you. Mostly going to sit here and listen to you for the next 50 minutes because I need this help.
So we have an optimal size for podcasting, and it's the magic number on the low end is 3. On the high end is 5. And so we broke that. I wanted Brian Gannis here because he has a ton of meetings, but it's a little bit different than the types of meetings that you have, Natalie, because you're doing Scrum Master stuff. So in terms of being I don't know if it's Scrum Master, you play so many different roles. You can do anything, Brian.
That's true.
In your roles, in those meetings you're facilitating, what is that experience like?
It's definitely similar to what Natalie's describing. I mean, if you have good facilitation, the meetings can be very productive. They can be over very quickly, but they're usually not. I find that the biggest problem with the meetings that I tend to find myself in is that meetings are used as a backup method to get information instead of properly researching a topic before trying to get a decision. Meetings are put on a calendar with the stated intention of being for making a decision, but really what it means is I want everyone to come together and tell me all the information that I should know about this, so that I can then make a decision. And people are brought in, they're given information to look at beforehand. They don't look at it. And I think that's something you have to prepare for. I'm sure we're going to chat about that as well. But that's usually what I'm finding, especially in kind of the BA role. And I myself have been guilty of it. When there are 10 people I need to go talk to truly understand something, sometimes the easiest method is for me to get all 10 people in a room together so I can just ask them questions and have those questions trigger others to give me the answers that I know are going to be helping me out. Those ones I try to structure as best I can so that we're actually moving forward quickly, but they're very hard to do. And it all just lends to, without having a true stated and adhered to purpose for what that meeting is, they get off rails very quickly. And I think one of the biggest things that you can do to help avoid that is not only having an agenda, but having someone who truly is in charge of facilitating the meeting. And you're not just there to gather people, you are there to actually run the meeting. That's the number one thing I've been trying to run, or to execute, I would say, recently in my meetings to try and avoid that problem. But yeah, it's like I said, in general, it's a lot of what Natalie's describing.
Yeah, and you guys are talking about sort of like active participants, and I think that's where my third number comes from. Like, you can have 5 active participants and 5 listeners gathering information or getting updates at the same time, as long as they're not all trying to jump in at the same time and push the meeting one way or the other. It's those kinds of 10 or 20. I mean, especially if you get 20 people into a meeting, it's all over. It's just that should be a presentation, but you're trying to treat it as a meeting and it never works. I mean, there are Congress.
When the question was asked about how many people, I actually went to a range of 10 to 20 for certain types of ideation sessions. I think having large numbers, you can run effective meetings like that. The main thing you have to then control is ensuring that people aren't just yelling over one another. I think that can be relatively easily done. And one of the standard things that I've seen happen is when you have a large group like that, you break them into smaller groups and have them engage in quick little ideation sessions and then bring everyone together. You know, usually there's a natural representative from each of the groups that starts to emerge and they kind of represent that group in larger conversations. But I think as long as they are controlled, you can have those and still be successful, but they're only for very specific purposes, and making decisions on how to move forward is not one of those purposes. Right. That cannot be an executive call that has to happen. It has to be a brainstorming type of session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same thing there, Brian, where once you get to that amount of people, that's what I would call a workshop.
Yeah.
It has a very specific purpose. It's highly facilitated. Someone is running that meeting. They are keeping time. They will stop people from talking. There might be exercises, you're ideating together. Very structured. And so that in my mind is a workshop, unless, as you said, Peter, you're just doing a presentation to a group of that many people.
So you've got working meetings, you've got workshops, you have meetings to get a decision made. You've got the meeting that's not really a meeting, it's the presentation. So you go there and someone whips out a PowerPoint and talks for an hour and then asks people if there's any questions, and there aren't any, just silence. And then
do they read the PowerPoint page by page, item by item?
So, some meetings really need facilitation, like workshops, definitely. Would you say there's meetings that need facilitation that don't really get facilitation? The facilitation is you got to invite.
Oh, I would say every meeting that isn't the presentation. As someone that likes to run a meeting, I think that's how you make them go well, right? As Brian kind of said, sort of the top 5 things to, help your meetings be more successful. Have an objective, have an agenda that ideally you can send out ahead of time, even if it's a loose one. If your agenda is 2 bullet points, you are off to the races. You are way farther ahead than having nothing. Send those 2 bullet points out ahead of time, right? But so have an objective, have an agenda, consider the attendees, how many and who are they. But then in terms of facilitation, the last 2 really come down to that in my mind, where I would say, concluding with clarity, be it a topic during the meeting or the meeting itself. But I'm a big fan of pausing for a moment to capture a decision or capture a takeaway, especially because a lot of times we're talking about ambiguous, maybe nebulous things. We'll go in a circle, we'll agree on something, and then, half a conversation later, agree that was dumb and it needs to be this other thing. All of that stuff is really valuable when you can pause for a moment and say, okay, so I think I heard this, right? Is this what we all just agreed on? Okay, great. Let me write that down for a second. And then you move through the topics like that. And then at the very end, acknowledging action items and takeaways, and bonus points if you send that out afterwards, I guess. I'll be honest, I often don't, but I do always talk about it at the end of the meeting. So-and-so is going to go do this and that and this, and we're going to schedule this other meeting, or we're done, good job, whatever that may be. So it's kind of the beginning, middle, end right there.
I think one of the important things that you just said is the agenda. I have so many on mind. I've actually taken this tip from somebody else at STG. I just don't, unless there's an agenda, I've stopped going, right? Which is a kind of a thing that I can do in my role, and I've said this ahead of time, right? Like, hey, send me an agenda. Let me know. If I don't need to be there, I can send somebody in my place. But goodness gracious, if it's just, like you said, an ambiguous something where there's 30 people on, I'm not, I want to make sure, we're consultants, we bill by the hour. I want to make sure that if I'm going to be charging my client money for my time, that I'm actually going to be contributing to something, right? And not just occupying space and running up a tab, right? Like that's not what I want to do for myself, and it's not what I want to do for a client, right? Like,
right.
I think we're all self-aware enough, like we want to provide the best value for our clients that we can. So when I know that there's no agenda, when there's no like goal, right, I just won't show up. I'll make better use of my time for my clients' dollars. I also I really, really, really love when the facilitator, I love it when the follow-up comes at the end, right? Because sometimes you think you all got to a point, right? And then when you see somebody write it all down, you're like, oh God, no, my gosh, Jesus, they got to a point the minute I was looking up Twins news on my telephone. I lost focus for like 5 seconds and lost the script. So I love it when there's a record after the fact. And I think we were actually just talking about this, right, on our internally on our AI channel. Like if there's AI tools that can help do some of this for us.
Facilitate those, yeah.
Yeah, like the post-meeting notes. And I think they're going to get there, right? Like right now we get transcripts, but we don't get like real intelligence to the transcripts. But I do love that, right? Like it helps me, for a guy that's in so many of these, oftentimes like later on in the evening after I've walked my dog, like I'll pull out my laptop and I'll look and I'll review, okay, like here's everything that today, here's what's going to set me up for tomorrow. Cool. And I'll see meeting notes of like, oh God, I never said that. Did I say that?
What did I sign up for?
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's sending the follow-up is highly recommended. Absolutely. If you can get in the good habit of doing it.
I think one of the things that I've often personally experienced is I will resist the idea of being that person who takes down the notes and sends the follow-up because I don't want to get pigeonholed into always having to be the note taker. And it is an incredibly frustrating experience, especially when you're also responsible for facilitating the meeting. But one of the problems that I have often run into is once that person has volunteered to be note taker for a meeting, they get voluntold to do it for the rest of the meeting. It becomes
their job.
Yes, and it is not a pleasant experience, especially when you are dealing with concepts you may not understand very well, and you're trying to keep up with those notes and truly translate what everyone is saying. And that's something I really think people need to be aware of, is that it's a response until we get those tools that can do it for us.
We need those AI tools now.
We do need them now. We needed them 20 years ago.
I almost feel like that is, asking someone to be the note taker is because that's something you're going to be focusing on and listening to everybody else, and it's going to take you out of the game.
Yes.
And it's like, hey, will you take notes because you're not really as important to this meeting as the rest of us are? And then you're the permanent note taker. And I think the transcripts, but when you're in the room together, are you going to turn a tape recorder on and have it do the transcript for you? I can see that happening.
Yeah,
it's a good idea.
I'd appreciate
AI tools
that.
Are here.
Yeah.
Because that's where I'm sort of two minds. Like I'm with you, Brian, in that I don't love being pigeonholed into the note taker. Maybe I might be lying. I do enjoy taking notes, but part of that is because it's hard to trust other people's notes sometimes, because I will be perfectly honest. I've had some poor experiences in the past where, culturally, if everyone's open to it and you just try to rotate that role, right? And you say, hey, for this meeting, can you take notes? Or for this meeting, can you take notes? Even if you get over that hurdle, sometimes I've still had those meetings where the person whose job it was to take notes just didn't do a great job, or they wrote down the decision from the beginning of the circular conversation and not the decision at the end of the conversation that said, no, actually forget everything we said 10 minutes ago. That was all dumb. This is the real takeaway. If they skip that one and only write the first one, well, they actually just inverted the whole point of the meeting. And so for someone like Chad to go back and maybe read those notes at the end of the day later, he just read a completely incorrect meeting, which in my mind is like that starts spiraling into oh no, I can't let that happen. I have to take the notes. So like being able to trust people or trust a tool to help do that, I think might help free a lot of type A people.
Yeah, and that's why you never talk to the police. They're taking notes. They're humans. They get things wrong. Be careful. Chad, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I just heard somebody say, I like taking notes. I wanted to, what? I've never heard that before in my life. And God bless you if that is truly the case.
Oh yeah, I had cut out for a little bit there, but I'm back. You were just asking me to explain the I enjoy taking notes part.
Yes, is that really a thing?
Yeah, well, so I think it's the comfort. If I have to, as you sort of help me therapy through that statement for a moment, I think it's the whole rest of what I attached there that is part of why I like it, because I feel like I can trust that, yep, I captured what I wanted to capture and there's enough detail there, but not all the unnecessary stuff that we don't need or whatever. So I think I enjoy having that comfort and control of just trusting the notes afterwards.
So let me ask this question. Chad, do you never take notes? Your own notes?
No, I do. I do. And for me, it's two things. One, it's a lot of what Natalie's talking about, right? I want to have notes because I trust myself a little bit better than I trust everybody else, and I need to see those. So it's not that I don't always do it, but if it's something that's really going to impact me or my team, then yeah, I will take meticulous notes and request that the meeting be recorded, and then make sure afterwards to review what I wrote down is what everybody actually says is the case, because depending on the project or the situation you're in, the consequences for me of getting some things wrong are severe sometimes,
Costly, right? Yeah.
Incredibly costly. So I want to make sure, and just like she said, like I trust myself and my context and my agenda.
Right.
More than, and this might be slight ego, but like I just trust it more than passing it off to somebody else, and hoping that they get it right.
Well, I always take notes, but they're always my notes in my shorthand for my recall, not necessarily for dissemination, sharing, are good enough to cover everybody's opinion or anything like that. And then that's where, having someone, perhaps Natalie or someone like that, who loves taking notes and covering for everyone and sharing them works out really well. Whoever's doing that job. I've had several PMs in the old traditional days that were exceptional note takers. They would also drive the meeting, but they would take notes and cover decisions and things like that, and send it to everybody, and you'd go, yep, no, yep, and then you could make corrections.
Hey, I want to ask a quick follow-up, and I don't want this to become a whole talk about note-taking, but are you still a pen and paper person, or do you type it into OneNote? See, that's where I'm at. I think Peter and I, or wait, was that a notepad?
No, well, this is a Kindle Scribe, but it's an electronic notepad. I finally went there, and I love it. The iPad plus the Apple Pencil has finally gotten to the point for me where it's good enough and there's not enough lag where like I could take notes in there, and it can understand my handwriting somehow. It's perfect.
Does it provide a little resistance too, or is it still kind of slippery? And
it's depending on which tip you use. There's it will. But it feels way more natural now. Like right now, I used to be a huge stickler for this. Like I used to hate the electronic note taking, but I'm finally good with it. And then it's in Apple now. I just use default tools, so like they're everywhere. I'm an Apple guy, so like they're on my phone, they're on my iPad, they're on my MacBook, and it's perfect. So I'm all in there. What do you guys do? And Peter, you're a Kindle Scribe person, but same
Kindle
kind
Scribe.
of thing.
I've also done paper. I've also done Rocketbook, which is another one of those capture with pens, but then take pictures of and get it organized. Brian,
when you're doing BA work and you're having meetings, are you even able to take notes?
It depends. It definitely depends on how much facilitation I'm doing, and on what. For some of them, getting the permanent record, even though that altar is going to be changed in a week, is really important. And so a lot of my note taking will be done in something like Miro or a digital whiteboard, and they're just sloppy notes. But typically one of the solutions that I've arrived at, because I really want to be a pen and paper person or a electronic tablet person, but every time I have tried it, it just doesn't work for me. So I end up putting things digitally in somehow. And typically what I've done is I just open up Notepad and I screen share and I make everyone look at the notes I'm taking in real time. And it gives people an opportunity to tell me I got something wrong. It also gives me a moment to flesh it out. Then when I'm having trouble with something that was said or a thought that I'm trying to express, people are literally watching me fumble it in real time, and hopefully they'll be nice about it and help me as opposed to making fun of me. But that's been the best way that I have typically been accomplishing my notes now.
I think that one of the benefits
second
of
that a lot, Brian. Just to throw that in, I second that a lot. Having the live visual aid, I do that in a lot of my meetings. I use FigJam, basically like Miro, right? You're kind of writing it down. You're maybe throwing digital sticky notes around. It's something that's collaborative, like other people can chime in too, and they'll write a little something to just add context, but they don't need to say it out loud. I've had that happen a lot where they're like, I'm just gonna drop this here, but we don't have to talk about it right now, which is great. Now you're getting like extra context, right? I don't know. So I've definitely found that I love that method of facilitating and note-taking live.
It'll let people see where you're at, and they'll slow down instead of just bombarding you with things. Because I've been the note taker, which is a huge mistake because normally I don't write anything down. If you look at my notes at the end of the meeting, it's doodles and stuff. But if I have to stop people because I'm not that fast. So they'll be talking, I'll be like, wait, and I'll write down, what was that again? Wait. So it becomes kind of a adversarial situation.
I think, Kyle, the trick to that is that everyone is like that. No one is that fast other than court stenographers. And I just think we've all got this impression that everyone else is better and faster at taking notes in real time than we personally are. I just don't think it's true. I think we're all roughly on the same level. And we just need to remember that about each other when we're having noteworthy conversations.
I think you're absolutely right. And of those people that are equally slow, I am slower than they are.
I tried.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Natalie, start to finish, what's a good meeting look like? Beforehand, you're the facilitator. You need to get people ready. You need to get people engaged when they get there and make sure everything happens. What is that process for you?
So if I'm facilitating and I'm setting it up, I'll probably think about the list of attendees. That makes sense. If I'm facilitating the meeting, but it's like maybe not mine, if that makes sense. Like if it's on behalf of someone else, like I'll ask them to check the attendee list and be like, is there any other optional person you think needs to be here, or, required person, whatever. But so kind of double check the attendance list as needed. Send out the invite with whatever agenda I have, what I know we're going to talk about or go over. If I have things that I'm hoping people might look at beforehand, I'll attach them. But full disclosure, I often don't expect that people have looked at their homework, just because I think completely relying on the fact that they have might be a quick way to immediately derail your meeting. Because if they haven't and everyone shows up and your whole thing was planned out according to everyone's speed, then you're like already off to a bad start. So, send it out, hoping that some folks will check it out. They'll be extra engaged, extra up to speed, but always spending a little bit of time at the beginning and maybe building in a bit of time to just sort of recap. Hey, if you didn't really get a chance to look at this, or, just to give more context, here's what I was hoping you would really take away from having looked at this. Like you just kind of go over it again, and that gets people up to speed. But so send out the invite with the agenda, whatever attachments you want to add, and maybe even a couple of, prompts to support your goal. Right? Like as part of the agenda, I think it's important to say the goal of this meeting is to do blank. This will be a successful meeting if we've all walked away having decided on this or understood that. Like, kind of define the goal, define success, list your agenda, maybe even have a couple prompts of like, hey, to come ready to engage, think about this topic or like think about that. And then when everyone is there, as I said, I'm a big fan of like having that visual aid that I think grounds people on, we're all looking at this thing. Natalie's maybe taking notes, or we can see the agenda visually laid out. So we're going to go topic by topic and like scroll down the page, and we're going to hit on these things. And so we just kind of do that. During the meeting, we're going through, I prompt, people discuss, we poke at it, we come up with some sort of decision. And then, as I said, I'm a big fan of making that space to pause and say, all right, so, roll up of this topic. I think this is what we all just heard, right? Yep, write that down. All right. And then you move on together. So you go through the meeting like that. And at the end, acknowledge those action items if anyone needs to do something and the takeaways. And then, as Chad said, ideally, there's some kind of summary of all that then gets sent out afterwards. So there's a good record and some asynchronous stuff. And as I said, I don't always do that, but I do usually send the link to the whiteboard that we were on. So it's maybe a half measure of at least getting people an easy link to jump into to get back to the place that we had the meeting. Yeah.
So all that happens, and that's all fantastic and sounds absolutely correct. And it sounds like it would be a great meeting. If I show up, I will derail it. I will I'll start cracking jokes. And so what do you do with someone like that? How do you handle like the communication that's happening within the meeting and keep it on track?
Good question. So facilitation is definitely like an art with a bit of science as its foundation, I think. Knowing that people do like to share and participate, right? Have you ever had that experience where, I mean, I think I do this all the time, honestly, where someone will ask like, oh yeah, did that make sense? Did I get it all? Anything you want to add, Natalie? I'll be like, no, I don't think so, other than, and then I say pretty much the exact same thing that the person had just, like almost just because you feel the need to contribute. So like everyone kind of does that, right? One thing as a personal tip, and then I'll get to your question about managing other people, but for myself, trying to manage myself, something I like to do, I think this came from a comedian, maybe if he was the original source, but this little 3-question triage for yourself to say, does it need to be said, whatever it is you think you're about to add? Does it need to be said by me, or is someone else like more equipped to say this? Should I wait, but see if someone else says this? And does it need to be...
Did you say something before that? Because you froze a little bit, and I want to make sure we capture all of it.
Yeah, I know it's getting a little stuttery, but does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said by me now? Or is it something I could say later or after the fact or not in this meeting, right? So just like trying to ask myself those 3 little questions in my head before I just start talking is a good way to curb some of that extra stuff. And it helps make room for other people to contribute, if you're a long-winded person like myself, making room for other people.
No idea what that's like.
I was going to say, how do you stop Kyle?
But yeah, so like facilitating other people, just general tips is, I think, not being afraid to step in, right? If you're kind of working with someone that just never leaves a breath and they just keep filling space and there's no natural pause, right? That can be a really hard, like, ooh, how do I break in on this person's rhythm without kind of like rudely interrupting them? If you're the facilitator, that is your job, in my opinion, sort of full stop, right? If you're running the meeting, no one else will do it but you, because no one else really has that role. That's your role to step in. So you just politely, oh, hey, Kyle, yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. I think I've got that down in the notes, but I do want to be mindful of time. We've got a few other topics that we really need to hit. So I'm going to move us along just to facilitate the conversation here. But if we, need to circle back on more of this topic, like you can talk to me after the meeting or something, right? So it's just you step in, you politely wield your facilitator hat and say, I'm going to move us forward because the agenda requires it of us.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover. We'd love to hear, joke time, but we really got to get through it. I've been told in advance of meetings, it's important stuff. And could you just not be yourself for an hour? Just dial it back. I did it. It was hard, but I made it. I think we need to talk about the, now, Chad, you had mentioned not attending if there's no agenda. And I remember that, hearing that from Jeff Bezos had put out a thing about meetings, and it was, if there's no agenda, you don't have to show up, and no one's allowed to use PowerPoint. I know you have some feelings about PowerPoint.
Yes. I'm as anti-PowerPoint as one can get. I believe it is an abused tool that once served a mighty purpose that no longer does. It has become a crutch for people who refuse to work on their skills in regard to how to facilitate a meeting. A lot of this was based around one of my absolute favorite college professors who taught my public speaking class, and she held incredibly rigid rules on what we were allowed to do with PowerPoint. And I follow those rules to this day. One of them is the very simple one of, if I put text on a screen, I will not just sit there and then read you the text. I may put very quick bullet points as references to help both myself and my audience connect with what I am saying verbally, but the text is there merely as a placeholder for a larger verbal point. So no reading, just straight off of that. And then the other big one that I have often executed is present information on a slide, talk about that information. Then the next slide you move to is a blank slide. It's a black screen that does not draw visual attention away from the people in your meeting anymore. It brings it back to me, the speaker, which is where I want that attention drawn. Those are the two biggest ones that we had to follow. And like I said, I have brought that however long ago I was in that class. every year that I have had to run a meeting, prepare a presentation, whatever I've been doing, I have followed those rules as much as possible. And it makes a difference. It holds people's attention better. You don't hear this could have been an email type complaints from people. It makes a really, really big difference. And we all need to follow this to some degree, at least, especially the first point.
I've actually stopped using PowerPoint when I have the choice. There's a tool called IA Presenter. It's like it is a presentation, but you write your presentations basically in Markdown with a couple other things, and it tries to help you enforce exactly what you're talking about, Brian. Mm-hmm. I do the same thing. I mean, if you've ever attended one of the AI meetings, it's just 3 slides, right? Like the intro. And they all have a very particular style to them, right? Like some kind of fun picture on the face of it. Never, ever, ever use like office clip art unless it's the series that Will Ferrell did as a joke. And then it's almost always one word sentence, like one word ideas.
Yep.
And then a blank, but I don't leave it blank, but it's, here's another picture, right? So picture. Picture concept. I can't stand the text-filled PowerPoint slides for all the reasons you're talking about, right? Like It takes your attention away from everything else, and it literally could have just been paragraphs in an email, right? Like it's the worst thing.
If you're able to summarize everything onto a series of slides with text, it's the literal definition of it could have been an email. This could have just been a series of notes that you sent out, and maybe that turns into a meeting later to discuss those points and make a decision on those points. But yeah, you've done the hard work of turning it into an email. Just do it. Yeah. Make it an email.
I have a follow-up question for you guys, though, because I do very much generally agree with not having the super text-filled slides. But I've worked in a number of environments where this presentation meeting is really intended to be like a readout of something meeting. And so now you might argue that, well, the premise is invalid. Just don't make it a meeting, make it an email. But let's say we are going to have that meeting because folks just want to get together in the room for that presentation. Do you also send out like speaker notes after the fact then, or what? Because sometimes if you don't have enough information on your slides, if you send out that deck afterwards, when people say, hey, can you share that? Because I want to read it again later, it doesn't really have anything on it. So do you send additional information along with that deck? Or would you just put it in the deck and then speak less,
I've, in the past, I hit a point where I decided that I was not going to give people my slides anymore because it didn't do the heavy lifting of what I was talking about. It's like, this isn't going to do the job. This goes with what I said. And so I'm not going to give you something with my name on it that is not even half the information. So no, you're not getting my slides.
+1, the ideal content to be sent out afterward is a recording of the meeting in that situation. I suspect that the people who organize the SDG big event have probably been frustrated with me because we try to get PowerPoints from all the presenters, and mine, taken without the context of what I'm saying, are garbage. They are a bunch of meaningless slides that offer zero context unless you were there to hear what I had to say about them. And I don't offer my speaker notes because otherwise it feels like I've defeated the purpose. Then in that case, I should have just written out a white paper on whatever I planned on talking about and sent that out to people instead to read at their leisure.
Mildly different take. And this goes back to, not to talk about tools too much, but the tool that I mentioned, that IA Presenter, actually has functionality specifically around notes, right? So like, as you're presenting, right, the audience sees one thing. I've actually got a different view. I kind of like PowerPoints, they got the little notes part at the bottom.
Yeah,
I present front and center. And like that's supposed to be the speaker's context. And then afterwards it will you just right click and say like send my notes out, right? And it's useful if you've got something like you're saying now, like if you've got something prepared, like our own internal like quarterly reviews, right? Kind of neat to see those numbers, but maybe I don't need to see them in PowerPoint format. I follow along a little bit better if we don't go to a slide and then all the information is there all at once, right? I like the hit a button, show something on a slide, and then things pop up one at a time. Right? That's kind of cool. I mean, at least it holds my attention a little bit more than seeing a slide and then reading everything.
Because otherwise, everybody reads the slide first at the same time when it shows up on the screen, right?
Right, while you're talking.
Yeah, and I'm super impatient. So like I'm in my head, I'll read it fast and I'll be like, all right, get there quicker, right? Like now I feel like I'm wasting, 30 seconds waiting for you to catch up to where I read to. So
can I tell you? Oh, sorry, finish your thought there. I was going to say, can I tell you something though from what you're saying? I've done that a number of times that I guess I don't know how it worked out for everyone else, but I feel like it worked out well for me in that I would prepare a slide deck that has like 50 slides in it, because it's like, yep, here's a couple of things, or here I'm going to talk about each thing in the slides build. And there's just like different states of the slides. And then I do send out the slides or like the PDF of the slides afterwards, but I send them the condensed version, where a slide that maybe took 7 clicks to build, and so in my thing that was 7 slides, in the PDF it's just the 1, and so they could scroll through the presentation to see just the text-filled slides, but I didn't present it that way.
I found that kills a lot of your prep time for your meeting. You're trying to make a nice looking slide deck and some cool images and things like that, and all of a sudden, 2 hours of your time has been crafting this thing, and that's 2 hours you could have been refining what you were going to say and delivering a better version of your presentation. Yeah, I think having a couple slides, if you have key information that people need to look at, are useful in a meeting. 50 slides in a meeting, then it's a presentation. And that's fine. I mean, some things you have to just transfer information into people's heads and then give them an opportunity to ask questions. So I think an in-person thing like that is still a value. I'd like to know that ahead of time. Like, am I going just to listen to this thing? Because I've gone to some things where it's, the format is kind of a group discussion situation, and it's a person giving a presentation for an hour. And I usually don't see those anymore. Those are pretty rare for me. As we wind down, we got 10 minutes left. I think I just said my parting thoughts. We can go around the horn. Brian, parting thoughts?
Just that recently at the client I'm currently assigned, I've started becoming very rigid on some of the very specific meeting rules that I'll be following. Some of them are, we start on time. If you're late, you're late. That's not my problem anymore. And I don't know, it's been met with some mixed success, but I'm going to keep doing it because it's not my job to teach you how to be there at 9 a.m.
And I would encourage anybody listening that has to deal with that, break all those rules. Just hammer him. I'm kidding, of course. Culture is tough to overcome sometimes, especially show up late to meetings culture. That is a tough one. Though it ought not to be, especially with the online remote meetings that we're doing. You're just clicking on a button. You're not walking across campus or anything like that anymore. You're just clicking a button. You should be there on time. All right. Yeah. I'll keep going with this. No, let me just run as long as I'm laying it out there. Short as possible. You do not need to extend the meeting just because to fill the time. You're not giving time back. You're just cutting it short. You're making it the right length. As much information as you can give out beforehand to facilitate a discussion. But if you're doing a presentation, then nothing, because you're going to present it all in the meeting anyway. So that's me. I kind of what I said earlier. I mean, just be conscious of, especially as consultants, I'm really keyed up about the amount of money these meetings cost our clients, right? So like I see a meeting, there's 25 people in there and there's 3 people talking, like 3 people collaborating. Call it out. Start calling it out, right? Because it depending on the environment you're in, that stuff just gets this momentum behind it, and it happens more and more. And you should really be, as a consultant, in my mind, right? I could be completely wrong.
I've seen that be effective, Chad, where people like this, looking around, this meeting costs us $10,000. Is this really where we wanted to spend that money, or something like that? People know the math.
But call it out, make it known. And don't show up without an agenda, and really be fair about how you're spending. I mean, because by you attending, you are spending our clients' money. Be fair to yourself and to them about those situations, right? Like it would be easy for me to shut off my brain and just bill 30 hours a week just sitting in meetings that I don't need to be in. That's not a good use of anybody's time. So I would love for folks to be more conscious of that, and for leadership across the board to recognize it and try to do some grand, like Jeff Bezos type gesture where what did Amazon just put out a big, as part of their come back to the office policy, the fella also had a whole spiel about meetings and effective use of time and everything else. I would love for more large organizations to make gestures like that and let it be known that like we're not going to spend and waste our money and our resources on these brain drains.
Any parting thoughts before we head out?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to highlight just how cultural this is, like from what all three of you said there, and we spent a lot of time during this conversation getting kind of tactical about some of the like note-taking stuff and the how to actually do the meeting thing, but the cultural aspect of trying to get people in a place where they don't have expectations for meetings to be wasteful, like that they expect meetings to be productive and meaningful connection with other people and collaboration with other people. There's a concept in design that I'm sure applies in a lot of other places as well, but generally we try to reduce the amount of clutter on an interface. Right, remove all the stuff that doesn't need to be there. And that's actually a two birds with one stone thing, because what it does is while you remove the clutter, it also leaves the stuff that's there and makes it more important. Then it stands out more just because it's what's left. So as Chad was saying, he's maybe experiencing a lot of like 6-hour meeting days. If you pull open your calendar and it's just blocked out from end to end with meetings, that's not going to be a productive week. Not at all. And no one's going to think that. So the more that culturally we're slimming down the amount of time, the amount of people, we're preparing to make the most of the time, and everybody is kind of doing that and uplifting each other to do that, you can reduce the clutter on your calendars and make the most out of the meetings that you do have.
Well, thanks for showing up, everybody. Appreciate it. And Natalie, thanks for anchoring the topic for us. A lot of good stuff. It made me rethink all the check-in meetings I have on my calendar and all the recurring meetings and things that I could just cancel. Yeah, they don't need to be there. We could talk offline. We can do this. We can do that. I can send an email. That does bother me that the thing that came out of our lockdown remote world was having to schedule all of these check-in meetings to make sure you talk to somebody. And that's what I like about working out of the office. I work out of the office every day, and you can see, Peter, that I'm at my home, so I just lied. I try to work out of the office every day, and so I get a lot of that check-in stuff happening naturally now, so that's really nice. Let's say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.